Sabu earned a reputation as one of wrestling's most unpredictable stars, but he was just as outspoken outside the ring as he was crazy inside it. Over the years, he was brutally honest about the wrestlers he hated working with. By 1994, he was already making a name for himself as a maniac in the ring, and a lot of that reputation came thanks to his time in Japan. While he was there, he'd worked alongside Chris Benoit and was impressed with his skill, so in ECW, Sabu recommended him for a job. But while he respected Benoit as a worker, he didn't care for him much as a person. Before they'd even wrestled each other, Sabu thought that he was unfriendly and said that he took himself too seriously and wouldn't talk to him unless they were booked together. At November to Remember in 1994, they did wrestle each other, and it should have been a great match, but it only lasted 2 minutes because Benoit broke Sabu's neck. He narrowly avoided being paralysed, but he said that his right side went numb for about 30 seconds after the impact. Of course, Sabu was one of the toughest men in the business, but the injury nagged him for the rest of his career. But despite being angry at Benoit, immediately after the incident, he said that he didn't hold that against him because accidents in the ring happen. His dislike for Benoit simply came down to his attitude backstage and taking himself far too seriously. Sabu described Chris's wife Nancy as being like a sister to him and said that she'd really helped him when he first got into the business, so when she was murdered by Chris in 2007, it hit him especially hard. Another man that Sabu thought took himself too seriously was Taz. Early on in ECW, he enjoyed working with him. His first match in the company was against Taz, which he said was his favourite match ever. They even became tag team champions together, but as time went on, he said that Taz started to get a high opinion of himself and he became difficult to work with. They were always competitive with each other, but eventually that crossed the line into Taz getting a big ego, and Sabu suspected that that came from a place of insecurity. He admitted that he was jealous of how close Taz was to Paul Heyman because that proximity gave him influence. He was jealous of me, I was jealous of him. That he lived so close to Paulie because he got to go to the studio every week, and I lived in Michigan, so I could only go to the studio every now and then, but he was always close to Paulie to where he could make things go his way if he wanted to. I didn't really want a job to him, but I had to be talked into it because, you know, who wants to lose? Nobody really wants to lose. When Taz went, fuck Sabu, he meant that. That wasn't planned. He meant that. That was him speaking from the heart. The friction between the two men got strong enough for Sabu to not want to lose clean to him, but Heyman eventually persuaded him to do it. In 1995, Sabu skipped an ECW booking for a payday in Japan. He was originally scheduled to wrestle Taz on that ECW show, and when he no-showed, Taz allegedly cried like a baby about it to Heyman. This pissed Heyman off enough to publicly fire Sabu for the indiscretion, which set the stage for an entire year of Taz burying him in promos. Sabu later said that he thought that Taz's FTW title was a complete joke, explaining that Taz wanted to be the world champion, but Paul wasn't keen on it, so he made himself champion instead. But while there was real heat between them in ECW, Sabu admitted that it came from a place of competition, and they ended up being cool with each other in the years after. The real issue for Sabu in ECW was with Paul Heyman. In 1994, Sabu actually had a big money offer on the table from the WWF. He claimed it was somewhere in the region of $200,000 a year, but he turned them down. Allegedly, Heyman convinced him to stay in ECW, promising that the company was about to blow up and be bigger than the WWF. He allegedly told him that he'd be making $1 million a year once it all took off. Sabu took his word for it at the time, but he later admitted it was one of the biggest mistakes of his entire career. I wish I would have took the WWF's offer. It just seemed so good. What Paul was promising. Pay-per-view, millions of dollars a year, action figures, everything we didn't have. Magazines, you know, we never had any of that shit. Money, we still didn't have money. Bad checks. What followed was years of bad checks and ridiculous excuses. Heyman allegedly once told the locker room that a FedEx plane had crashed with all the money on board. He also said that he never received any money for his appearances in the ECW video games or for his action figure. Yeah, every now and then a check would bounce and I'd let it go because I was doing good in Japan. I didn't really need the ECW money. I still wanted it. I didn't need it. I didn't live off the ECW money. I lived off Japan money. So whenever a check bounced, I kind of bring it up to him and let it go. If he made up for it, okay. If he didn't, not that big of a deal. But years later, it kind of added up to, you know, $100,000 and stuff. I never got anything from the video game. Nobody got anything from that. Paul and maybe Dreamer, but no one got anything from it. By the time ECW finally closed down, Sabu said Heyman owed the wrestlers over $1 million in total. He made the point that Heyman secretly had always wanted to work for Vince McMahon, and all those years of rebellion and making ECW look like the counterculture didn't mean anything. He made the point that Heyman secretly had always wanted to work for Vince McMahon, even while he was leading the ECW locker room to believe that they were the anti-WWF. And speaking of the WWF, Sabu believed that Heyman's bitterness is the reason he was kept out of the Invasion storyline in 2001 and why he wasn't even picked as a first choice for the One Night Stand show. 2000 or 1999, WCW, Kevin Sullivan and JJ Dillon wanted to talk to me, so I went to go to talk to them in Atlanta. I didn't quit ECW then, I was only having a secret meeting because my thinking was I was going to go to WCW, get a buttload of money and come back to ECW and pick up where I left off. But when I went there, somebody saw me and they called Paul, and Paul called the WCW office and said that he was going to sue them, and so they dropped all their dealings with me. So in 2001 for the Invasion storyline, he was still bitter about it. My name never came up. It barely came up for One Night Stand. I wasn't their first choice. They were going to have the show without me. I don't blame him. I don't even have hard feelings over him anymore. I don't blame him for being mad. He almost escaped Heyman's clutches in 1995 when he briefly went to WCW. It was here that he first met one of his heroes in Ric Flair, or at least he was a hero until he spoke to him for the first time. Flair had crossed paths with Sabu's uncle, the Sheik, during the territory days, and according to Sabu, Flair didn't like him, and that disdain carried over to his nephew. The Sheik had taught Sabu to always shake hands with everyone in the locker room, and even the people he didn't like, but in the WCW locker room, Flair deliberately ignored him. Sabu only spent 2 months in WCW, but in that time, his opinion of the Nature Boy completely flipped, and he was left feeling very bitter about his former hero. In a later interview, he told the story from Flair's time in TNA. Flair had been kicked out of a Marriott hotel and ended up staying in the same budget hotel as Sabu, and according to him, one night he saw Flair wandering around the place completely naked in public. Any respect that Sabu still had for Flair went out the window after seeing that. In 2006, Sabu was hired by WWE to work on their revived ECW brand. It was here that he worked with Test, and he wasn't impressed. According to Sabu, Test saw himself as the new leader of ECW and attempted to assert his authority over the locker room, which involved him refusing to sell for smaller guys on the roster. Sabu remembered a moment in the locker room where Test told both he and CM Punk that because he was 6'7", he would never sell for them, but the biggest reason that he disliked working with Test was his finishing move. He said he was left seeing stars every time he had to take the big boot. Sabu told him to his face that if he couldn't do the move safely, then he should stop doing it. Many years later, he said that everyone who worked with Test had something to complain about. It was on the ECW brand, where both Sabu and Kurt Angle were briefly on the same roster. Sabu recalled Angle having a problem with him because Angle saw himself as WWE's resident crazy guy. Sabu said that he never wanted or expected that label, but it still caused friction between them. As far as Sabu was concerned, Angle took himself far too seriously, and they were incompatible when the bell rang too. His last match on the ECW brand was against Angle, and he felt like he ruined it by over-planning and overthinking everything. He's a pain in the ass, going over the match over and over and over. It drove me crazy. So I had to hide from him. I'd hide from him because he'd want to go over the spot, and it would be the same old thing. It's a wrestling match, not a science project. I got this 3 hours ago. While Kurt later praised Sabu for being professional and easy to work with, Sabu certainly didn't feel the same way.